hopefully you guys. I think I met a lot of you guys when I was in Sri Lanka a few months back. I'm Kamruz Jaman. I'm Sitecore MVP for the past 5 years. Hopefully you've been reading a bit of my stuff on my blog, and I'm JammyCam on Twitter, Slack, Stack Exchange, Stack Overflow. If you're not on any of those, get on there. There's obviously a lot of help on there from a lot of guys from a lot of different parts of the community. So Sitecore 9 got released just a month ago officially. A few of us have been playing with it for a few weeks before that. We got it as a MVP beta release. It's obviously a big release. The last time a major release happened was 2014 when Sitecore 8 got released. There have obviously been a few, like the minor releases, 8.1, 8.2, but obviously with 9 coming out, there's lots of new things in this new release. I'm gonna briefly go over a few bits of these. There seriously is a lot in there, and going into detail, any depth in these it will take a lot of time, but it's almost presentations in their own right. But I try and cover these areas and go through a few little bits like the Sitecore installation framework, some changes in search, the configuration. There's some major changes in there in a good way. Some changes in authentication, dynamic placeholders, and XConnect is the new service layer in between XDP. Big changes to forms for those of you using web forms for marketers. This will be a bit of a welcome change, I think. Anybody doing anything with marketing and engagement, the old engagement plans, will really love this new marketing automation tool they've got in there, and so it kind of shows off some of the new UI parts in Sitecore. And if there's any front end people here, then the JavaScript Services is a bit wow. I'll go into this one later. This is a bit crazy. So obviously with any new release, the requirements always seem to change. No different with this new release. So it will now, finally, you can install Sitecore with Windows Server 2016. The minimum server requirements are 2012 release 2. But now that it's on 2016, you can start to use some of these new features of 2016, like HTTP2. So if you're running over HTTPS, you can start using browser multiplexing. So files download a lot quicker. There has been a lot of tests on HTTP2 versus normal HTTP, or especially HTTPS. It is a lot quicker, the way, particularly the way the connections and things are established. It's worth doing some performance tests on that. Server development-wise, or local machine-wise, the requirement is Windows 10 or Windows 8.1. If you're running Windows 7, that may cause you a bit of a problem, so you might need to look at upgrading to the latest version to Windows. Along with that, you'll need IIS 8.5 or IIS 10. They've also bumped up the .NET version, so it's using the latest .NET 4.6.2 framework. Along with the servers, they've also increased the requirements for the databases. They recommend SQL Server 2016. You can use 2014 for CMS only mode. Big news is that Mongo is no longer a requirement. You can use SQL Server for the analytics databases, the XDB databases. The current release doesn't support MongoDB, but a future release will. The next point update, so Sitecore 9 update 1 will support MongoDB and Cosmos DB. So that's the old document DB on Azure. I think it's a nice change. They moved it to the XDB part to a provider-based model, like a lot of the rest of Sitecore. So you just change the configuration to say I want to use SQL Server or I want to use Mongo, and it just happens. You will require Solar. Solar 6.1 is a recommended version, but 6.6.2 seems to be a lot more stable for a lot of people in the community. We've had a lot of trouble with this recommended version, so just be aware of that. Or you can use Azure Search. Obviously, it's a bit more tricky for local development. You can use Lucene, but only for CMS only mode. XConnect, the XDB and XDB does have a requirement for Solar or Azure, so you will need that if you're doing full-on Sitecore development mode. Sitecore have also been going down a secure by default route. I think this is a good thing. Especially with all the news of hacks and data leaks and data being lost and all sorts. Just yesterday there was all the Uber was all over the news that they had been hacked a few months ago, for example, and a few months back there was Equifax in the US. So security by default, I think, is a good thing. It promotes good best practice and good practice. So Sitecore have gone down this route. So all traffic between the servers, so the web servers and XConnect and Solar and everything else is now over HTTPS. So that means that all data is encrypted in motion and and it can also be encrypted at rest in XConnect. So all the data that you're collecting about users, the analytics data, any other bits and pieces, the personally identifiable sensitive data is also encrypted. This is a requirement for compliance, especially if you're using general data protection, especially with general data protection regulation in the EU, GDPR, also known as the right to be forgotten. So, especially in the UK, any user can say, "What data do you hold about me? I want you to wipe all this data for me." It is required as compliance. It also does make it easier. There is some new stuff in XConnect which makes it easier to remove this kind of information. So since everything is under HTTPS, you will require self-certificates. Locally, you can use self-signed certificates. There are a number of blog posts by a number of guys on how to do this. I'll point you to a few in a few minutes. So when it comes to installation, unfortunately, Sitecore 9 cannot be installed with SIM. If you're running CMS only mode, you can use SIM, but if you want to install Sitecore properly with all the XDB parts, then you can't install SIM. They have a new framework. It's Sitecore Installation framework. So Sitecore have introduced this new framework to allow you to install and configure Sitecore. It's a PowerShell-based module, and it will allow you to deploy and configure standard sets and standard configurations of Sitecore that you'd expect. But it's PowerShell, so of course it's extendable. You can add in your own steps. You can change the way certain steps work. You can integrate the entire thing with your deployment process. I think most deployment tools have PowerShell runners, PowerShell steps. So this, if you wanted to, you could install entire new servers and then run with PowerShell, and then go ahead and run the SIF installation scripts, and you have Sitecore up and running. and a number of other changes that they've made, which should make configuration in general a lot easier with Sitecore. It is a new tool, so I think initially it will be a bit of a pain for a lot of us. Certainly it was different for me, and I've been using PowerShell on and off for a little while. So if you guys want to just go ahead and install Sitecore, I suggest taking a look at these blog posts. So the first one is a blog post by Jeremy Davis, who has a PowerShell script to download and install Solar as a service or, with SSL certificates on your local machine. Second is a tool by Rob Anneman. He has written a Windows Forms-based UI over the Sitecore installation framework. So you just go in, put in a few details, and it will go ahead and install the Sitecore part of it. These two kind of work side by side. Also suggest taking a look at a bunch of videos that Alan Pellin has created and on YouTube. It's like a 7 or 8 part series on installing Sitecore and SIF and all the little bits and pieces that you need to do. Really good to go ahead and understand all the little different bits and pieces that you actually need to install. Alan Pellin is the guy who wrote Sitecore Installation Sim, Sitecore Installation, I can't remember what it's called now. He's a guy who wrote Sim and a whole bunch of other tools, so a really smart guy. Before you go and install these two, you will need to register the PowerShell scripts. So you need to register it like using this register PS repository from the Sitecore MyGet gallery. So that's kind of like the PowerShell equivalent of NuGet. Once you've done that, you can then go ahead and run this install module, Sitecore Installation Framework, and that will install SIF locally, and then you can use these tools on top to install Sitecore. Using these two locally, I had Sitecore up and running within like 15 minutes. That was Solar and Sitecore 9 with Xconnect. And also, if you need to install SQL Server locally, you can install SQL Server 2016 or Developer Edition. Developer Edition is free. You don't need a license. It's free for development purposes, so you don't need like an MSDN license to install that. So basically, don't bother with the Express version. That would be my recommendation. Okay, so search. I mentioned earlier that Solar and Azure is the new recommended search providers. It is required for Xconnect. Xconnect is obviously going to be collecting a lot of data, and it needs to sort that in the background, and it needs something which is fast and something which is good. So hence the reason for Solar. Solar has always been a recommendation if you're using a multi-server environment. So if you have multiple CD servers or a multi-server architecture in general, Solar has been recommended anyway. So hopefully most of you are familiar with that anyway. The APIs don't really change in the background from a code perspective, so there have been a few changes in the search APIs. So Sitecore have added some nice stuff. So you've got things like spell check, suggest, highlight, more like this type functionality. I think this is the type of functionality that a lot of people have been using or asking for over time anyway. So it's nice just to have this built in and out of the box. And hopefully it'll make search a bit more central to the platform and for your users on the sites. So one of the big areas of changes which I really like is the configuration. So I think for most of us, Sitecore server configuration has been a pain. It's complicated. There's a lot of config files. You've got to enable this one. You've got to disable that one. You've got to enable this setting and disable that other setting, and it makes setting up environments tricky. If you need to, it makes our deployment processes more complex. I know I've written a few blog posts on how I've dealt with these things over time, but you're having to go and delete certain files and follow these specific naming conventions and have all these files tucked away in the z.sum folder. And then on top of that, if you're switching between Lucene and Solar and Azure, then you're having to enable and disable a bunch of other files. And I think the most annoying part was this spreadsheet here. Having to download this spreadsheet, and it's just like columns and rows and rows and rows of data, and columns and columns and columns of data, depending on what kind of combination of CM or CD or processing, and it wasn't always correct either. There was sometimes it was, initially it was wrong as well. So it was really frustrating for a lot of us, and a lot of guys would use PowerShell to kind of try to make this a bit easier. But lo and behold, Sitecore 9, there is a brand new rules-based configuration. This is really, really nice. It'll allow you to. It's really, really simple. It's just a simple one configuration key that you need to change, and then you can switch between the different types of environments. They've added additional folders now, so you don't just have this one include folder and then you have to add this z.last folder to put your configuration to make sure it's last. We have 4 new folder locations to put the configuration in. Well, we've got 2, but there's 4 in total. You can also control load orders. So before, things would only load alphabetically by config file and then alphabetically by folder. You can now control exactly which order things are loaded in, and you can also easily switch to search provider just as easily as you can configure a server. It's just as easy to switch search provider as well. So within the web config, there is in the default one you'll find 2 new app settings, and that is in web config and not in Sitecore configs. It's in the web.config file. There's these 2 new app settings. So there's a role define and a search define. And to switch to a different type of server, it's as simple as changing this role define value to one of the inbuilt values. So the built-in ones are content delivery, content management, processing, reporting, and standalone. And I think for like 95% of people, this should cover their requirements. You can also switch search provider. Obviously, I mentioned Lucene. It's not really recommended. You can use CMS only mode. Solar and Azure are the 2 recommended ones. I did notice if you're using CIF to install Sitecore, then it will change it to Solar automatically, and it will also change the name of the cores to an instance name. So if you're running multiple instances of Sitecore on your local machine, for example, it will point the Solar cores to different ones. So that's quite nice. Don't have to do it manually. It's part of CIF. So let's put some nice thought into it. So to configure to then configure your settings, we can now tag up settings or entire configuration nodes with this with these new attributes. So up here we have a role define, and here we can see it's a role require. We can start doing things like using just individual ones. It could just be content management, but we can also then say content management or standalone. So this setting would apply when the role is defined as standalone or content management. You can also use some other groupings, grouping operators that they've put in there. You can use an AND if for some reason you need to make sure that a particular instance is configured with for two different types of roles. Not a very good example, but you can at this point here you could define this as standalone comma or processing, so you can comma separate multiple values in here. You can also use grouping, so you can see the brackets here. So if you've got these kinds of combinations that you need to do, and you can also do a not. So this would apply to all the other types of environments. I don't think these middle two should be used very often, but you never know. Even this to a certain degree, this could be useful. But okay, the options are there. So similar to these other ones, the search, you can see it's a search require. If you open up the search configurations in Sitecore now, you'll see that the Solar configs have this search require Solar, and the Lucene ones have Lucene, and the Azure ones have Azure. All the config files will be enabled out of the box. All the search config files are now enabled out of the box. It's using these rules-based configuration that everything is now enabled and disabled essentially. Config load order. So, classic problem. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Or more specifically for us, in a Helix-based solution. I don't know how many of you guys are using Helix, but we have the problem of what came first, the foundation or the feature. Now, normally you'd say foundation, but the problem is feature is alphabetically earlier than foundation. So if you were to have a feature foundation and a project folder, the feature configs would load first. So the way we've normally got around this is to use like a 1.foundation and 2.feature and a 3.project. So we can now deal with this. There is a new layers.config file in the app config folder. This allows us to specify load orders. So of the 4 folders, one of them I said was the custom folder, which actually very handily points back to the old app config include folder. So for most of us, we don't have to do anything. But we can add in a load order and specify that foundation should load before feature and before project. This bit that I've highlighted here, it's not out of the box, unfortunately. You do have to add this in yourself, but this part at the top, Sitecore has now moved all of its own configuration to this app config Sitecore folder. If you look in there, you'll see there are, let me see if I can find it. If you look in there now, you'll see there are now a lot of folders in here in the default install of Sitecore. So to deal with that, Sitecore has its own load order in this configuration. So you can see that these are not alphabetical, so you can just do exactly the same. There's also a new modules folder, so if you're a module creator, so something like Sitecore PowerShell extensions as an example, they can place their modules on there, and then if you need to override them in your own project, you can do so here. It just stops configurations kind of conflicting with each other, or you just competing for the way things are loaded, and I think it just stops a lot of confusion as well. There is also an environment folder, so if you need to put specific configs for your QA servers or your UAT servers or your pre-prod, then logically speaking, you'd place them in here. You can also disable these entire layers. You just need to add a mode equals off to the layer to this section, and that will disable that entire layer. So if you're having some issues with your local machine, for example, and you need to check whether it was whether it was the configs from your project or whether it was Sitecore config, you could just disable this entire custom layer. Saves having to move them out the way or individually changing the extensions of files. One other thing to mention, you can also specify files in the load order. So if you wanted to specify a file in some folder, for example, you could place a path here and change this type to file, and it would load specific files before in that specific order. So if it was for folders, you'd put it before the folders, or you could specify the different files against each other if you needed to. It's also possible to create custom roles. So just like we saw earlier with the role define and the search define, we can specify our own. It can be any key that you want. So I've specified environment here, or env, and defined that as UAT. And then on my own settings, I can go ahead and specify what the requirement for that specific setting is. I have a blog post on this on my site. I think a good use case for this is things like the site's configuration. So if you have different environments and they have different host names, for example, then you could just place them all in config now and just set the require value for that, and it's just everything is just one configuration. Obviously, don't put your passwords and stuff in configuration and check them into GitHub. I think that's exactly how Uber got hacked the other day. So don't put your passwords in there. But if it's non-sensitive data like domain names and that kind of stuff, then it's obviously fine, and you can just specify like this, and it will just make your deploy process easier, and then you don't have to use that environment folder and overrides and that kind of stuff. Remember to also specify the namespaces here. So there's env here, and you can see this env here at the end of the this URL. Obviously, this URL doesn't exist. It works. It does some magic in the background. I don't know exactly how it works, but it does. If you're looking at this stuff and you're thinking it kind of looks familiar, it's for the large part, it's the Sitecore role configuration project from GitHub, which has been around from about Sitecore 8 or so. It's a project that Alan Pellin had worked on, and for the most part, it's a complete copy of that. So it's yeah, very, very nice. I think a lot of us have been looking at this over time and waiting almost until it's made it into Sitecore. So yeah, very, very nice changes. Those are the changes that I mentioned earlier. We've also got some changes to authentication. Sitecore has added federated authentication using some own middlewares. This is, I think a lot of us have been waiting for this as well. It's Sitecore has supported AD's integration. We're using the LDAP module for a while, but it's kind of the only thing that's supported out of the box. And obviously, a lot of people want single sign-on and integration with things like Facebook and Twitter and Google's and all the rest of that stuff. So it's nice that this is finally in there. It uses own middlewares. There's a whole bunch of middlewares available. The ones kind of out of the box, if you like, are the ones listed here. You can create a custom one if you needed to do something which most of these do not support. But the nice thing about this new module, so to speak, is the users can be either virtual users or users persisted in the actual membership database. So that means that if you need to, you can use these authentication methods for logging users into either your website on the front end or the CMS in the back end. Obviously, if you're able to log the users in on the front end, use a thing like single sign-on, then you can actually start collecting more information about users and richer information about them in order to identify them and track them and all the rest of that. Obviously, this will then feed into XDB and will just make your personalization data a lot better. It can be used as a replacement for the AD module, so I think this is the way to go for the future. There's a good blog post by Baz Litgen on this. He has previously written on a few blog posts on authentication, and I think he had actually written one before using Owen middlewares. He's written a new one for Sitecore 9. It uses Auth0, auth0.com as an identity broker. He actually wrote it as a custom middleware. So it's interesting to go and see the code in there. It's actually surprisingly very little code, and he was able to integrate with Auth0, which acted as an identity broker. And then in Auth0, he could go in and then just say, all right, I want to enable Facebook, Google, Twitter, LinkedIn, and that then fed back into Sitecore, and he was able to log in and set his authentication in the CMS in this case, but obviously you can also do it on the front end. But yeah, it's essentially managing multiple identity providers with a single connection, but very interesting read, I think, and to see that how little code you actually need now and how simple it is compared to previous versions of Sitecore where it was quite messy. Dynamic placeholders. I think a lot of us have been waiting for a long time. Nick Wasserman, first article I saw on dynamic placeholders was by Nick Wasserman back in 2011. So over 6 years now. So good news is we've finally got dynamic placeholders out of the box. We've been requesting it for a long time, and it's very nice implementation. It's I think a lot of us are probably using something like Fortis most likely, or there's a few other blog posts on community based dynamic placeholders. Hopefully you guys all know what the issue is with the dynamic placeholders. I think it's a fairly well-known problem. The new implementation in Sitecore 9 is very feature rich. It adds some extra things from what comes out of the box in Sitecore from the other providers. You can control things from the experience editor now. The keys are generated using pipelines, so if you needed to, you can go ahead and tap into those and change them. It is an MVC only implementation, so if you're going to be doing stuff in web forms, and you're going to have problems with it, but I would hope if you're doing a new project on Sitecore 9 that you're not using web forms anyway, so hopefully that won't cause too much of an issue for most people. Let me show you a quick little snippet of code on this. So the dynamic placeholders, pretty much like before, you just specify html.sitecore.dynamic placeholder and add in your placeholder key. If you have multiple placeholders, you'll need to provide a seed because each placeholder does not know about another placeholder, and what this will do is it will increment the unique ID of that placeholder, in this case by 10 and then up to 100. If you have multiple repetition like I have here, you can do things in a bit more of a clever way. So I can use a function to actually generate this wrapper, and in this case generate 6, and then I can just go ahead and use a tag builder to actually create the type of tag I need, add in whatever CSS I need, and put in whatever other bits of HTML I need. You can also start to get more clever. You can start to do things like specify a default count, and then a max count. And because it is code, I can start to put in logic in there. Like every third one, I could add in a CSS class. I can pick up the current index number of the placeholder I'm rendering out. I could take the total placeholder count. So obviously in this case it will change between 3 and 6 as users change it. And I can also do different things. I can pass in some additional parameters. I can also pass in, so here I've passed in CSS class and I've passed in something called extra. I do have a quick demo of that. So that same code, very simple. It works. I can go ahead and edit those properties. And this key here is it's ph plus the placeholder name. Scroll into that, and plus count. So here it's defaulting to 3. Let's change that to 6, and then just as simple as that, I now have 6 placeholders. Let's go ahead and add. And those additional parameters that I showed you. So I've got ph, dynamic column, and that's that CSS class I just showed you a second ago. I can change that. And just like that, you can just see that that text went bold. And then you've got ph underscore 3, and then extra was that second parameter I just showed you. The 3 is the placeholder number, 0 based. So in this case, it will be the 4th one. I can pass in another parameter in another CSS class in this instance. And there you go, it just changes. And it's all done in the placeholder using renderer parameters by the content editors. Obviously, these rendering parameters are the most friendly. So if you've got things like counts, you'd probably want to use a rendering parameters template and have a drop down value here or something like that. So you can make it a bit more smarter and a bit easier for the user. But yeah, obviously this is very nice for the users. I've got a post on dynamic placeholders on my site. Go take a read. There's also a post by Richard Seal on dynamic placeholders. He's got 2 posts on dynamic placeholders. He's also got one on migrating from Fortis to this new dynamic placeholders module using a PowerShell, Sitecore PowerShell extension script. XConnect, the next huge thing that's been announced. I think it's been there's been a lot of talk about XConnect for a while. There was a talk on it on Symposium last year. And it's finally been released to everyone. So the current issue, I'd say, with XDB at the moment is its ability to act independently and its ability to scale. XDB at the moment is everything that happens on XDB happens via the Sitecore service. So the Sitecore content management servers or the Sitecore content delivery servers, if you're trying to pass something in through the web. So or you have processing servers and reporting servers which are acting on these, but they all have a reliance on Sitecore and Sitecore kernel. The other problem is that XDB really was very web centric. Everything centered around kind of web interactions. So you had a contact which could have multiple interactions with pages, and those pages could then register page events or goals or outcomes or something. Unfortunately, not all interactions are via the web. Some are done offline, some are done via between Sitecore and the databases. Yeah.
We lost you for few seconds.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Which bit did you catch me on? Did you catch the last bit of this?
Yeah, I think you are doing last week.
Okay. So where was I? Okay. So I was saying the XConnect, XDB.
Collecting the data from other resource like offline.
Okay, perfect. Right. Okay. Yeah. Perfect. So the problem with XDB was getting data in from other sources, so offline sources, CRM, other marketing tools, or even just like your mobile devices. If you have mobile apps, you can push that data in so easily. So Sitecore have introduced this new layer. It's called XConnect. XConnect works in tandem with XDB. XDB and XConnect are very much tied together. They're not independent systems, so to speak. But XConnect is a new service layer, and if you need to get experienced data in any way, then you need to talk via the XConnect server and via the XConnect APIs. But everything within Sitecore uses this new service layer. So the content management server will talk to XDB via the XConnect server, via the APIs. The content delivery system will talk to it via the APIs, and any other systems that you want to talk to, that you want to collect data on, you should talk to it via the APIs as well. So if you have apps that you need to talk to it, they need to talk to it via the API. If you have other external systems, so the example in the earlier slide was Salesforce and Dynamics CRM. They should also talk to it via the API. There is a bit of a kicker to this. All data between, or communication between XConnect server and anything else has to be via a trusted device. So if you need to get data in from, say, a mobile app, an IoT device maybe, then it will need to be via some sort of layer that you have here, for example, that you implement, which can then be, this could then be trusted, and that would then be able to talk to XConnect. The data is encrypted at rest. You can even use some of the SQL Server features for encryption at rest as well to make it a bit more secure. But communication is over HTTPS, and you will need to have the appropriate client certificates and the certificate thumbprints set up to make this happen. If you're using CIF locally, it'll all be set up. But just be aware that when you're trying to connect things and you're trying to talk to the different collections within XConnect, then you might have a bit of a problem. But this now allows us to capture data from everywhere. I think this is kind of the thing that we expected XDB to be able to do in the first place. And since this layer here is a service layer, it then allows this modular architecture that we now see, and that has now allowed us to use Mongo, to use SQL Server, or to use Mongo, or to use Cosmos DB, Document DB in the background. So this gives us a lot more choice in what we want to use. It is a standalone service layer. There is no requirement on Sitecore.kernel, for example, so it will allow us to scale differently. It doesn't have the heaviness of having to run a Sitecore instance. It's much more streamlined. It's written in .NET Core 2, so it's very, very modern and very, very lightweight, and it can be deployed in a number of ways. It can be deployed in Azure as a web app, or it can be run as a standalone app in Linux if you wanted to now, right? So it's nice to see this change going forward from Sitecore. You can collect and analyze data from all lots of different locations, like I said before. The data protocol uses the OData protocol for the RESTful APIs, which is an open data protocol. It's a set of standards for building and consuming RESTful APIs. It's an industry standard almost. So it's not something that Sitecore has kind of built themselves. It follows other standards. So it's nice to be standardized in that regard. And it does have support for GDPR, the right to be forgotten. It's pretty big in the EU. I'm not sure about in a lot of areas, but different locations throughout the world might have different regulations. You can create a module to deal with this kind of scenario. So in this situation, if you have you're collecting people's data, analytics data about them, and you need to just remove that analytics data, kind of almost anonymize it, this is what this allows you to do. Previously, you'd have to just delete the entire analytics data, which would obviously then affect your analytics. Instead of being a known contact, you completely remove them. Instead of being an anonymous contact, you completely remove the analytics data. So in order to host XConnect, you will find a new site in Sitecore. So locally, I've got a new XConnect site. IIS, I have a new site as well with SIF. Obviously, it doesn't need to run in IIS, but local deployments it does. And you'll find a lot more databases in SQL Server to deal with reporting and the collections and that kind of stuff. So like I said, it does mean you don't have to run Mongo anymore, but it also does mean that you need to have SQL Server. Not so much of a problem locally, not so much of a problem if you have SQL Server in a IaaS type install, but if you have SQL Server in SQL Azure, then you are going to need a lot more databases. At that point, you might want to start looking at things like elastic pools. So there is some cost implication to this. So we've really just moved the problem on from Mongo onto SQL Server. So you might have to do a bit of cost analysis to see which works out better. But MongoDB support is coming back, so you could always use Mongo. Web Forms for Marketers. Yeah, it's the module that we all like to hate. We all want to love it, but for some reason we always end up banging our head against the desk. But it's gone. It's gone in Sitecore 9. We now have a brand new forms module. It is completely rewritten from the ground up, and there's a brand new modern interface to this. You can do things, you can do drag and drop. You can collect better analytics on the forms. You can have templates. It is part of the core product, and the other new thing in there is multi-page forms. A lot of us want to do this, so you can have like multiple pages of like wizard-like forms. It is MVC only, so again, if you're doing web forms, you're going to get stuck on this. It's important to note this is not web forms for marketers. It is a new and separate module. Web forms for marketers will be supported until Sitecore 9.1, until the next release. So you can install Sitecore 9 right now and install web forms for marketers, and hopefully that'll make it easier to upgrade. But in 9.1, web forms for marketers will no longer be there, so you will have to migrate. Unfortunately, there is currently no migration tool, but we are hoping that they bring something in soon. Also makes it a lot easier to collect analytics data. So for each form, you can collect analytics data on a particular form to see how it's been performing. So the views, how many people are handling this kind of stuff, the form, that kind of stuff. But you can also do it on a field level as well, so you can see, if people are getting a lot of errors on a specific form, or they're not filling specific fields in and that kind of stuff. So that will help you tune your forms over time to make it, hopefully make it easier for people to fill in, and hopefully allow you to then collect that data more easily. Along with the forms changes, there's also a new marketing automation tool. So this is a replacement for engagement automation. The old engagement automation tool was written in Silverlight. This new one is written in Speak 3, which is Angular based. So again, another they've moved from their proprietary Speak implementation to Angular, which is obviously more open source and more people know it and more people can use it. There's a lot of stuff here out of the box in this marketing automation tool. It's fully integrated with XConnect. You will be able to integrate it with Sitecore, the forms module, via events and goals and that kind of stuff. And you also have a new thing, which is the concept of live events. So if you need to do something on the website as soon as somebody hits it, so a live event, it can just happen straight away, rather than it going into, say, the events databases and then it getting picked up by a processing server later on. Let's see if I can do your quote on this. Let me just give you. There you go. So here's a new marketing automation tool. It's all HTML5 based essentially, but very, very slick. You can let me like that. You could go ahead and start grabbing, like I'm going to move this to a new campaign. As soon as I move it on, it gives me it really leads the user on to what they need to do instead of, it's very intuitive. So here you can see that this no longer goes anywhere, so I can just go here and I can now go and select which campaign I want to move that person onto. It's very, 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 very slick, very, very easy to use, and very, very intuitive. I have not done much with it before, but I picked it up very, very quickly. It's kind of like the iPad of the tools nowadays. You know, you just start using it, and it's very, very obvious what to do. Another new module, or new module that's been released, it's in tech preview. If any of you guys are front-end developers that have been using things like React, then this is the module for you. Sitecore JavaScript Services was announced a few months back in SubCon Europe. It's built for front-end developers to allow those guys to jump into Sitecore development and build applications using their favorite IDE, operating system, their favorite way of working, using using React at the moment. And there's a lot of stuff in here which is not stuff I have been doing much with, but the front end guys, I think it makes a lot of sense. I've looked into this a fair amount, and it's really, really nice architecture. The way it interacts, I think it lends itself to make it a lot more extensible in the future. They are working on React, on Angular and Vue in the future. They can do this because of the way the current architecture works and the way it allows them to plug in different modules to deal with this kind of stuff. There's a lot of documentation on this. Go take a look. Obviously, there's been some ways of doing headless in the past, but I think this is very, very different in the way it interacts and the way you're able to set things up. You can take a code first approach. So if you want to run this almost offline locally, your front-end developers could do that without having much interaction with Sitecore, and then it's almost a case of just plugging it into Sitecore at the end stage. You will require a consumption-based license. If you don't have a consumption-based license, then go speak to your account manager, and hopefully they'll be able to hook something up for you. So like I mentioned, the architecture is different. It does obviously still talk back to Sitecore via a custom MVC controller layer, set of pipelines. It just plugs into those directly. But on the front end side, there is a new JavaScript layer. There's a React.jss dot something or other, which essentially gives it a middle layer for the server to be able to talk to the front end React JavaScript React stuff, and that implements things like placeholders and image renderers and that kind of stuff. So those things that Sitecore is doing on the background in the server, and that can then talk at this controller on the CD server, which will then pass back a bunch of JSON, which will be things like, hey, these are the layouts on this, these are the layout definitions on this item, and this is the data that goes with this item that you're requesting, serialized in JSON, and then you can just pass it over to your React app, and then your React app can do whatever it needs to build this all together. Since it is talking to Sitecore and looking at things like rendering and that kind of, and the data and that kind of stuff, it does mean that you can do personalization on various levels. So there is some good documentation on this on the JSS site. I would suggest taking a look at the intro section, and there is also a JSS for Sitecore.net developers or something like that section. That bill is very good. It goes into detail about how this section here works and how these bits here work and how they all play together and how they fit together. Definitely worth a read, and to even just get a good high level overview about how all this fits together and is glued together. I'm almost done. I've got a few more slides. Right, other stuff. There's been a lot of new abstractions made in this new version of Sitecore. As always, over the past few versions, Sitecore in the background have been busy cleaning away a lot of the old code base and that kind of stuff. So a lot of stuff that was obsolete has now been removed. So if you're upgrading from 8, you might start to find that things are a bit broken if you haven't previously been cleaning up and looking at those warnings. This is the code cleanup I've just mentioned. There's a lot of experience editor enhancements. So they've been trying to make this faster and faster as they've gone along. So one of the stats I heard was Sitecore 8.2 in the experience editor, there was 254 HTTP requests. In Sitecore 9, there's only 72. So just at initial startup, it's making a lot less calls. It's also half a meg less in terms of CSS and JavaScript and that kind of stuff. They've also killed the old shear UI ribbon. So if you had custom buttons and that kind of stuff using the old shear method, then that's no longer going to work. Along with that, they also made the speak-based ribbon better by lazy loading ribbon tabs. So each ribbon would make an HTTP call to get some data in the background to check if it should be enabled and that kind of stuff. So Sitecore 9, they just don't do those initially. So when you click on a ribbon button, that's when it will go and load that, make those calls. So that makes it a lot quicker as well, and saves a lot of unnecessary calls that you might not always be using. No more Silverlight. I mentioned that with the marketing automation tool, and they've got rid of it for a lot of the other tools. I think one of the client licensing centers used it as well, so that's gone as well. And upgrades are supposed to be easier. They've got a bunch of new tools within the upgrade process itself to help with this, and you can directly upgrade to Sitecore 9 from any version of Sitecore 8 just using the installation package. There's one other change which is worth mentioning. The HTTP request pipeline processors, they now fire from the on-post authentication HTTP module event from from the .NET process. It was previously on the onBegin event. For most people, it probably won't make much of a difference, but just be aware that it is now from the on-post authentication. It should have the advantage that you can check whether a user is authenticated from your HTTP request pipelines now. So if you need to do something on request begin, then you can look at that user and look at the context user on the request. The other one, device detection and SXA. These both now come included in Sitecore 9, but I believe you need consumption-based licenses for both of these. If you're on consumption-based licensing, they are free. So my SXA particularly, I think if you're on a consumption-based license, you should probably start using it. It kind of makes sense since it is free and doesn't cost you anything, and will give you a big head start and a big jump in your projects. Lots of new documentation. Just beware that when you go to doc.sitecore.net, it looks exactly the same, and there's this very small link to the Sitecore 9 Developer Center. When you go there, you'll see it looks different. It looks very, very nice, and if you've ever seen the Helix documentation, it looks similar and in that style. They've got documentation on lots and lots of different bits. Just be aware that it's split between this experience management and experience platform. So all the analyticsy stuff is in here. Experience management is just kind of core CMS, if you like. But yes, very, very clean, very, very nice. The documentation team has done a very, very good job on this. There's also this jss.sitecore.net for the JavaScript Services site that I mentioned earlier. Go take a look at that. Interesting read. And I'm almost done. I'll just briefly go over some stuff that got shown at Sitecore Symposium a couple of months back. So there was mention of Cortex. So it's a new machine learning AI thing which is going to be plugged into Sitecore. It hasn't been released yet. I think it'll be released early next year. And the idea behind Cortex is you've got this new XConnect layer which is collecting data from lots of different places now, whether that's your website, mobile apps, maybe your CRM, maybe Salesforce. You need to analyze this data. So why not use machine learning to do this? So Cortex is a machine learning engine. You can obviously plug in your own models and that kind of stuff to analyze this data. Hopefully it will come with a bunch of models pre-built to help with this, because this is not my area of expertise. But it's plugged right into Sitecore, into XDB or XConnect, and into the rules engine. And the idea behind this is you can use Cortex to start looking for new audience segments that you may not have thought of, to score content tests automatically, to automatically and continuously run A/B and multivariant testing. Maybe it can start to do automatic personalization at a future date. I mean, it's machine learning, right? So at this point, it's just the more data you feed it and the better your models that you give it, the more it's going to be able to do things for you automatically. Hey, maybe it can even do our laundry one of these days. The other thing that got mentioned, that got kind of announced, it's very much beta stages. Proof of concept work was Project Horizon and Project Zenith. So it's demonstrated by Niels Hanberg, who's a new director of user experience. And the idea behind this is it starts to give us drag and drop functionality, the kind of thing which to a certain degree SXA has, but also the thing that you'd kind of expect in a modern web system. So you pick your components from here and just drag them onto your experience editor canvas, if you like. And it's not. This is not the experience editor. It's going to be a separate application almost again. And you can do things like mobile view and stuff. So did that kind of modern UI that we'd expect. He also demonstrated some concepts around how you would design information architectures and of your site. These kind of like structures to easily conceptualize how your site is configured and that kind of stuff. And since you're collecting a lot of data, some new dashboards for analyzing this data. And there was this proof of concept about heat maps. This is really interesting. So you're looking at what parts of a page are your users interacting with the most. Where is their mouse hovering? Where are they looking at? Are they going towards the call to actions that we've placed on there, or are they completely not looking at the buy button at all? So maybe that can then start helping you to look at how your page is being used and maybe redesign that page to make it easier for users to use and make it better for conversions. The other new thing that's coming very, very soon is Sitecore Commerce 9. So this is not like the old Commerce engine. It's completely rewritten in .NET Core 2. It's rewritten from the ground up. It will have things like PaaS support. They follow the module-based approach, so it's all module. It's just a whole bunch of plugins that you can add in to extend SXA with new functionality or new things that you need. Integrates very nicely with the rules engine and also the marketing automation. So everything in Sitecore is kind of swimming together and in sync. There's a bunch of new dashboards in there to help manage data and user experience manager, and there's things that you're collecting on your user. That is also using Speak 3. So these are two things that are now using Speak 3, but I think Speak 3 will become more and more prevalent over time. And an SXA storefront was also announced. So it will provide a bunch of commerce-specific components. Since it's SXA, you can imagine it's all Helix-based and multi-tenant-based. So it should really help to give a kickstart to those commerce projects. All right, and I think I've kind of run over a bit of time. Sorry about that, but yeah, as you can see, there's a hell of a lot of stuff in there, and a lot to cover, and I've kind of just skimmed over a lot of these things, so hopefully it gives you a lot of info into what's new in Sitecore 9 and the kind of things that have been introduced and the kind of things that are going to be coming up in the future, and the kind of things that you could be looking at to sort of upskill in, if you like, as well. If you guys have any questions, then feel free to ask.
Regarding that GDPR. Hello?
Yeah, hey.
Yeah, regarding that GDPR support. Does it, customizable, or is it just?
Yes. So it's out of the box. They provide a bunch of the fields, if you like, that you collect data on is marked as sensitive. If you were to say start collecting some custom data or some custom facets, you could start to mark those as being sensitive. So when it comes to GDPR and deleting, removing that user data, it will remove anything which has been marked as sensitive. So I think out of the box, things like name and email address and things like that are probably marked as date of birth, and that kind of stuff is marked as sensitive. But if you were to extend it, you just mark those facets as being sensitive, and then when you do a remove, it will remove all those bits of data, if you like. I think it's very much geared towards the EU, from what I understand, and the EU data protection laws. I think they're probably the strictest ones in the world at the moment anyway, but if you wanted to, you could extend it and create your own module, essentially, which plugs into XConnect to do whatever data removal that you need. Any other?
Yeah, I have one question. Regarding the front end that is being developed, how customizable is that? Is it just as HTML or is it from the context of Sitecore?
The JavaScript services?
Yeah, I mean, when I am to come up with maybe a customized an HTML, I might use JSS or...
Yeah, it's a complete React app. So if you're used to doing things like React, and they will be introducing Angular and Vue, the rendering is completely done by the front end. So you can do single page apps, you can just do partial refreshes, you can do whatever you like. It is essentially getting data from Sitecore and passing that onto your React app, and then you can do whatever you want with it. You're not tied together with Sitecore at that point, so to speak. It is just passing back JSON data to say, hey, this item has these renderings currently on it, and this is the data for the data sources of those items in JSON format.
So the analytics are being recorded further.
Yeah, the analytics are being recorded. I don't know how exactly. I don't know if it's from the front end, but or from the Sitecore side. So your React app will call back to Sitecore using a route, and at that point it will then go through Sitecore code to get a collection of what the renderings are and what the data is. So all the calls are going back to Sitecore. So at that point, Sitecore can record the analytics on the server side. So I don't think it's actually client side. I think it is. It would make sense that it's just being recorded at that point when the calls are being made.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then since it is going through Sitecore's layout, there's a new layout service that they've added, which talks to the Sitecore item and collates all the layouts that and presentation details that are specified on an item. Since it is going through Sitecore's engine, it can then pick up the personalization part. So if you need to swap out a rendering for a different rendering, or you need to swap out a data source for a different data source, it can pick all that and return that to the user. If you don't have things like personalization, you can start to add in additional caching layers. The JSS layer is a separate application. It runs completely separate from Sitecore. It's a standalone service that talks back to Sitecore. So if you don't have any personalization and that kind of stuff, you can start to run those separately and add in, you could, in theory, add caching in between. So it's a lot quicker, but that I don't know exactly how that works in terms of licensing and that kind of stuff. Which is why they probably have made a requirement of the consumption-based license. There are a number of samples for JSS. There's some basic ones and there's some more advanced ones. And if you're on Slack, then jump into the JSS channel. The architects of that project are on there. Alex Schieber, Adam Weber, and Nick Wasserman. They are pretty active in that channel, so you can go and ask them questions directly if that's an area that you're really interested in.
Yeah, which is the Slack channel?
There's a JSS channel. Are you on the Slack group?
Yeah, I need the URL.
Yeah. So there's a JSS channel in Slack.
Any more questions?
No more? Yeah, so there is a lot of nice stuff on there. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to message me. I'm always around on Twitter or Slack or whatever, or get my email on Chaturanga. That's also fine. I'll send a slide deck as well. I've got a bunch of links. I know there's a whole bunch of stuff that I went through, and there's a bunch of links and stuff on there. So if you want to read up on those, I'll send you a slide deck to make it easier. Yeah.
Okay.
Great. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much, Campus.
Yeah. All right. And speak to you guys soon, hopefully.
Yep.
See you.
Yep.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.